From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Dylan, the Tennessee Pal Fagan. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Friends, neighbors, fellow conspiracy realists, Matt, Noel, Dylan, I was thinking we keep this beginning part short because as we record right now, it's Friday, March 21st, and drone strikes are continuing across the globe. US, Russia, China, Iran, pretty much anybody who can build a combat drone is doing so. And they're doing so because on the one hand, there are tremendous advantages, right? You're not sending a manned F-35 into enemy territory, risking the life of a pilot, or you're not sending a special operation in risking the lives of the people conducting that operation.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a positive thing when you consider the horrors of like past, trench warfare and all of that stuff. But it has its own kind of bag of badgers in terms of potential negatives as well, obviously.
Well, yeah, and individual human beings are being targeted in places across the world for a myriad of reasons. And the way technology has evolved and the access both individuals and governments have to every person's lives, the digital lives that we all lead, deciding who gets targeted, what gets targeted, has become increasingly complex and yet in some ways insanely simple.
Yeah, that's the thing. So on the one hand, as we said, the idea of these sorts of targeted strikes, they can ostensibly, in theory, save lives, but they can also reduce operational costs, just to put the petty part out there. But on the other hand, they can lead to disastrous mistakes, the deaths of innocent people, someone who was literally just in the wrong place at the wrong time or made friends with the wrong person on social media. This leads to the erosion of democracy. No fooling, no hyperbole. Tonight, we're exploring an ongoing conspiracy. Who gets to decide who dies? Here in the United States, let's be honest, it's not as though the public at large gets to vote on the fate of every suspected terrorist, but our country does have a system for determining this. It is murky, it is powerful, it is fascinating, it is bureaucratic, and it is terrifying. Friends and neighbors, we want to introduce you to the Disposition Matrix. It's a weird name.
And it's not just the U.S.
No.
Remember the old Five Eyes group that once was, that is now eroded?
How many eyes is it now?
I don't even know. I think there's just one big old eye on
that
top
sounds
of the
about
pyramid.
right.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
we'll see how these comments age because Five Eyes may be going blind, but that might be a story for another evening. The Disposition Matrix, it sounds like a silly name, but it's a very real thing. And to understand why why we consider it a conspiracy, we're going to have to start at the beginning of the United States after a word from our sponsors. Here are the facts. All right, the U.S. is like other democracies. In theory, it's defined by rule of law. In theory, it's defined by the rule of the public. You vote for representatives. We said it before. You vote for representatives who, in theory, will represent your wishes and desires. And I don't know. It's something we take for granted so often. It's so weird to remember what a huge change democracy was back in the day, right? Back in the founding of the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the concept of it on paper is fantastic. The idea that you put your faith in an individual who has the best interest of the people at heart, and hopefully through them, your will is enacted.
It's a nice thing to say.
Yes.
and tell everybody.
Yes.
And it's a difficult thing to do, right? In a way that is fair to everyone. When the U.S. was founded itself by conspiracy in 1776, a lot of other nations at the time were what we would call absolute monarchies. What does that mean? That means that if the ruler wakes up on the wrong side of the bed or they catch a case of the jimmies, a phrase I made up, they could instantly and radically change the laws of the land. And thank you. I mean, it's nuts when you think about it. A monarch could order the death of hundreds or thousands of people with no checks on their power. If you're targeted in an absolute monarchy, you have zero legal recourse. Habeas corpus, the right to appeal, the right to even just go to court. None of that's a thing. The king, the queen, anybody in charge, they could just say, hey, go kill that guy.
Well, historically, the only real recourse that the common people who are affected by this have is revolution, is further violence, is overthrow. There was really no other mechanism in place. And that, in theory, is what democracy provides.
Yeah. There is a court. There's just one guy, as you said, Ben.
And he's a kangaroo.
Up there at the top. Well, maybe. I think absolute monarchy is a great diss. That's something, we should use that somehow. And that dude is absolute monarchy. It just sounds like...
I do. I like it. I like malarkey. Yeah.
It's the opposite of hot cheese, which is a phrase we're bringing back on Ridiculous History.
Sure.
If something's cool, it's hot cheese.
Oh, yeah.
Melty, malleable.
Yes,
yellow. So yellow.
Melty. So, yeah, it's a great point. For most of human history, this absolute monarchical thing applied to any kind of rule you could imagine. International situations obviously would get complicated. Think of the multiple rulers who bucked against the Catholic Church in Europe, but domestic decisions were the whims of a single person. And the only avenue for serious political change was not just, we said revolution earlier, but it could also be war, or it could be incalculable tragedies, like the Black Death, like the plague.
Course correction, from the gods.
Right, because the point is, by hook or by crook, what had to happen was a great mass of people usually had to die for some sort of lasting change to occur. And if we're, again, being honest, a revolution or a war didn't usually change all that much. It's just like new management took over. There was a new parent company, and they kept the same system as before. They just put themselves at the top.
A soft reset.
Unless we forget the ye old assassination, which was, a good standby.
Very valid tool to get things done.
You could take out one or two really important people and not have the same effect. But, that thing where those people are no longer in charge, and then you just insert a few other people that are more to your liking, and then new management.
Then it becomes about like the ideology of the winning, revolutionaries, and if that's even that much better, or is it self-serving in a different direction, and this stuff takes a really long time to kind of shake out.
Yeah, please check out our series on the concept of assassination historically. As spoiler, it exists and will exist because it works. And if you're looking at the history here, you'll see that the U.S. and France and other emergent democracies sought to change this system. Even the most powerful person, they reasoned, needed to have some sort of rubric, some kind of logic or system behind ordering murder. The president, they argued, would be the servant of the people, never their king. And that applies to prime ministers as well. If we fast forward to, let's say, Dylan, give us a fast forward sound cue. Perfect. Stop it there. All right. So we're right after World War II. The U.S. already has a pretty bad jacket when it comes to democracy in theory versus democracy in action. There are all kinds of disasters, massacres, genocides, assassinations, to your earlier point, Matt. They run against the letter of the law, the spirit of democracy. There's this new world on the horizon. Just like other management shifts in nation states, the U.S. says, we're going to make a better world. Pax Americana, right? Global peace with the U.S. at the top. And they were able to do this because much of Europe and Asia it was in shambles after this horrific series of events called World War II. The planet looked around. The human planet looked around and they said, okay, never again. But war never really disappears.
War never changes.
Right. It's like government. It evolves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was looking up while you were opening the show, Ben. Just are wars less deadly now, like numbers wise? Like, how does the data shake out? And like the soft answer is yes, but there are other factors, like other forms of collateral damage that maybe didn't exist because of the precision and because of the range and the way that these kinds of modern warfare tactics are deployed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, can we do the fast forward machine again?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go to September 11th.
Hey,
Heard of it.
All right.
I was there. Not there, but I remember seeing it on TV in high school.
Yep. Let's throw in a couple tiny little pieces of context here, because as a part of that whole Pax Americana thing, the United States going up against the Soviet Union, we engaged in a little thing in Afghanistan and a couple other places, in the Middle East and in Africa with Soviet Union forces, the United States forces, but as mostly trained individuals within countries, right? And we had these proxy wars that occurred, which created a whole bunch of militarized groups that were splintered further and further. And a few of those came together, and a couple theoretically attacked the United States on September 11th, 2001. And that created this brand new thing that our democracy and a coalition of the willing decided was going to be a war on a concept, and that concept would be terror.
Yeah, I'm really glad you point that out, because that's what we're getting to when we say war evolves, like government evolves, right? And it's just like that Philip Larkin poem, which has a terrible title, "This Be the Verse," but it's an amazing poem. Everyone should read it. A war on a concept, rather than a contained war on a specific nation or a group of nations. The new enemies, many of whom are radicalized by their experiences surviving proxy wars, they don't exist in established military structure. We're talking shifting, decentralized coalitions of what you could loosely call extremist groups, and they're launching these waves of unpredictable, asymmetrical attacks around the world. Hit an embassy one day, right? Or maybe hit a single person, via improvised explosive device, or then maybe try to take down an airport. By the way, as we're recording, Heathrow is in some deep Thank you for beeping me, Dylan. Did you guys hear about this?
No, I didn't hear about Heathrow. What's going on there?
Heathrow lost power. There's massive fire, and thousands of people are stranded at the airport, or planes are turning around. And right now, people are still trying to figure out what happened. The elephant in the room there always is going to be: was it an accident, or was it on purpose?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's something else to factor in. In terms of this evolution of war, we also have to think about the evolution of cyber warfare and, hacking of infrastructure and causing terror, quote unquote, in that way.
The weaponization of information.
Mm-hmm. Oof, gosh.
Two-sided coin.
So, hey, let's jump back to war, guys. So the United States government and that coalition of the willing realized, especially after a bunch of countries deployed a bunch of troops on the ground into Afghanistan, into Iraq, into other places across the Middle East, right after September 11th, right around early 2003, they realized, this battle, it kind of reminds us of something. That time that we tried to expend Soviet resources by having them fight giant proxy wars in this same exact place in Afghanistan in particular.
The breaker of empires.
Exactly. Just realizing that, we cannot fight this war the way we've fought previous wars. Even the last time we were in Iraq, we can't fight the war like this. They needed a way to target these far-flung individuals and groups, right? And hey, they said, we've got this new technology.
Yeah, this is the way I think we can approach this on the ground through personal experience. So a growing number of powerful policymakers are saying, look, we're dealing with a new threat, right? And we are functioning under military and democratic norms or policies or laws, rules of the road that are unequipped to deal with this new flavor of danger. So if we stick with the rules of the road comparison for a moment, let's set the scene. If we get some traffic sounds. Perfect. All right, you're an average person. You're stuck in traffic. It stinks. You want to get out of this mess of these shrieking horns, these bumper-to-bumper tail lights, but you're just another driver on the road. You have to obey the law. In this comparison, the United States, more so than many other countries, is the most powerful car out there. Uncle Sam owns the road. Uncle Sam makes the laws of traffic. So if you run into any kind of complication or a thing you don't like, you can just change the rules, right? And that is what brings us to tonight's exploration. It's a struggle for democracy. It's a profound philosophical, operational dilemma. It's really kind of a question about the soul of a country. If you champion yourself as a protector of human rights, why are you creating secret lists of people to be captured, kidnapped, or killed? This is a true story. They were originally called kill list, but all these things we're describing now for this context, they have led our nation to something called the disposition matrix.
That's right. That's right. And it all goes back, in my mind, to the Cold War. Back in the day, it was, how do you find out if somebody in their heart of hearts believes in the other side, right? How do you know? It goes back to spycraft stuff and this paranoia about anyone could be a member of the enemy team, right? So, but in this case, it's specifically, they use that, what do they use that word? When they're talking about the war on terror, what they were saying without saying it was the war on Islamic terror. That is what they meant in those rooms, right? And that became a thing that was not okay to say. But that is ultimately when they're in the White House Situation Room on Terror Tuesday, they are.
Is that a thing?
No, that's what they call it.
It's like Taco Tuesday. Holy crap!
We're going to get into it, but that's what this thing was, and probably is. They were trying to figure out who could possibly be on the other team. And in this case, it was anybody that may be a part of one of these tiny splinter groups that are hidden away and unknown. And how do you figure out if somebody is or is not? And that's why this thing, the disposition matrix, was born.
And we'll see other precedents that we'll need to lean on, such as COINTELPRO, which also conducts what critics would call thoroughly un-American attempts to leverage divination for the greater good. We'll pause for a word from our sponsors, and then we'll introduce you to the disposition matrix. Here's where it gets crazy. All right, the term sounds obtuse, right? Disposition matrix. What is that? I propose that's a thing where if someone is hostile to you or rude to you, you could just say, "I don't like your disposition matrix here, dog." But I'm
going to disposition matrix dodge you.
In this sense, it is a concrete and dangerous thing. It is way beyond a kill list or a list of names. It's a database that's used to track, capture, kidnap, or murder suspected enemies of the United States. And we are purposely choosing our language here. Other euphemisms would be rendition instead of kidnapping, or,
enhanced interrogation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Disposing of. It
had everything. So it was a person's full biography, right? Where they went to school, where they currently live, the people they associate with. It had stuff in there about what particular threat they could pose to the United States or its allies. Again, like locations where they've been or might be, like with probabilities of where they might be. as well as a range of how to get rid of them. As you're saying, there have been like rendition or, kidnapping them and taking them to a black site, maybe somewhere in East Africa, or how to take them out. Like think of those old lists we talked about with how to take out Castro. Think mini versions of that for individual humans.
Yeah, again, it's way more than a list of names. We're going to dive into that level of sophistication as well as the inherent problems in a moment. I think before we continue, it is crucial to note the public owes a great debt of thanks to a journalist named Greg Miller. Back in 2012, Greg Miller brought the existence of the disposition matrix to the public eye. His investigative series is the first in-depth look at this. Prior to this journalist work, the mere existence of the matrix was officially considered a secret. And it's such a pickle, because democracy prides itself on due process. So how did this bastion of human rights and rule of law find itself not just putting out hit lists, but indeed going a step further and institutionalizing, bureaucratizing, I don't know if that's a word, codifying the practice? The story really, in this regard, starts with a guy named John O. Brennan. Not O apostrophe Brennan, but O, like his middle name starts with an O.
He was born in New Jersey in 1955 and could be considered a pretty classic American success story. He started to work for the CIA in 1980, and after that, he answered an employment ad or one ad in the New York Times.
That's how he got the job.
Yeah.
I love that. He's reading the classifieds,
yeah,
and he goes,
crazy.
"Oh, okay, yeah, CIA."
And so I guess they had very different recruitment tactics back in those days, but whatever it takes. He made a lot of particularly controversial decisions in his tenure, as well as some pretty powerful enemies in the United States and abroad.
Yeah, and he's like the success story that Drake wants to be. He started at the bottom of the CIA, and as you said, he rose through the ranks because of his fairly strident stands, or some would say unfairly strident stands, on bending the rules in the face of a greater good or in the face of enormous threats. He's the guy who defended torture, extraordinary rendition, enhanced interrogation. This came to the fore when he would be in confirmation hearings, and he would say things like, "Look, I personally don't approve of waterboarding, but I didn't stop anybody from doing it because we had a mission, and there were consequences to this." He was prevented from becoming director of the CIA or national intelligence back in 2008, I want to say, because of this. But internally, he had a lot of power. He had the experience, he had the expertise. He was considered a top authority. Colleagues admired him. He was also administration agnostic, which I think is a very important point here. So when you hear us reference, one of the Bush administrations, or you hear us reference the Barack Obama administration, we have to realize that Brennan was there, regardless of which political party took the king of the hill seat. So
yeah. Well, and remember that's 6 years up until 2008. That's 6 years of sending people to Guantanamo. Sometimes taxi drivers that accidentally got caught up in the situation. Sometimes that is, the suspected leader of organizations that gets sent to Guantanamo or to some other black site. And it's torture. This guy oversaw, with all the rest of the military and intelligence apparatus of the United States and a bunch of other countries, torturing people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he was, look, there's no two ways about it. These programs, illegal and ethically fraught as they are, they did get actual bad guys, but they also got innocent people who just happened to have similar names. That's a huge piece to remember to that taxi driver example. As Brennan is the White House counterterrorism advisor under the administration of President Barack Obama, he leads the charge to institutionalize, to codify this stuff. And his former colleagues and officials came forward, first anonymously and then later with their names on it. And they said, this guy is the principal, like the driving force of these kill lists. One guy, Daniel Benjamin, later told the New York Times that Brennan had, quote, more power and influence than anyone in a comparable position in the last 20 years. So this guy is a guy you can't really vote for directly, but he is making the moves.
Yep. And guys, to be honest, making this type of list of like your top enemies is something any military is going to do in a time of war, right? Who are the people we can take out that will have the most effect? That makes sense. It's weird to think of it in a matrix of all the other moves that the government is taking at the time, right?
Yeah. A sea change. Proper, a change in the way warfare is conducted. The CIA becomes essentially a paramilitary force, or they're doing a lot of things a paramilitary force would do instead of an intelligence agency. The drone fleet massively expands. More and more groups are getting into the mixtape of the disposition matrix, and they're also helping carry out its desires. It soon evolves or expands to take over all the other kill lists that various drone programs run by various other U.S. Agencies and departments have. But yeah, by the way, I guess we should mention that the Pentagon, JSOC, et cetera, they had their kill lists too. And the Matrix is bringing them all together. The word you would hear often on the Terrorist Tuesdays would be something like streamlining.
Yeah. Jeez. Just on that same tip, Ben, about how everything's changing so much, we mentioned a couple episodes back about the technology of drones and even using like a mothership drone and multiple smaller drones that could have explosives attached to them. That goes back to the original invasion of Iraq, like during George Bush's father's reign. And that technology has been evolving and evolving. It's been used. The Predator drones were in use when we invaded Iraq for the second time. And then that technology has been evolving. And then we get up to 2012 here when we start to learn about this stuff. Drone technology is so far advanced, and the abilities that each single one has to theoretically target an individual, right? And we'll learn like how that's the kind of sales pitch thing that you would get right from the manufacturer.
Right. We also, we know that there was a strong desire for that kind of technological aptitude, just historically. I'm trying to remember. We did an episode of Ridiculous History on this. I'm trying to remember the experimental plane that could deploy other planes. What we're saying is there's always been a precedent for this. The technology started to catch up with the desire and the imagination. Brennan is not himself designing UAV, unmanned aerial vehicles, but he is reaching a position of prominence because of the climate at the time. The U.S. is beset with global threats. They're coming from multiple regions. There was this very real, and I hate to say it, not invalid sense that playing by the old rules would not just put the U.S. on its back foot. It could mean that thousands of innocent people would die. So we had to take serious emergency action. If we didn't, people were saying in the halls of power, then September 11th could be more than a single tremendous catastrophe. It could be a harbinger, a precedent.
Yeah, that's definitely what's driving everyone and everything, I think, at this point. The thought that could happen again. And while a catastrophe to the level of September 11 hasn't occurred in the United States yet, across the years that we're covering here, terror attacks, or what were labeled as terror attacks, were occurring across the globe and often in countries that were allies of the United States. So you can see why that pressure was there. And because the United States has set itself up as that peacekeeper, essentially the one that goes in when stuff goes wrong, the human beings at the top, like Brennan here, again, I keep trying to go back to internal pressure that somebody feels, right?
Sure.
There's the pressure overall that maybe an organization or like a governmental organization or an arm of the military feels, but then that individual, when they go to sleep at night, feels it.
Yeah, and it's a ticking time bomb kind of situation, because you can think of various moments in history and various things immortalized in film and fiction where someone says, yeah, I'm a bad guy, but I have to be the guy who keeps the other bad guys from the door. Tip of the cap to True Detective. Brennan, his supporters, the various U.S. presidents, everyone else, it's not as though they were waking up gleefully planning to kill folks for laughs. They were perhaps at first reluctantly bending and then later breaking established norms in service of this greater good. Call me a villain if you must, but if my actions are saving the lives of innocent people, then yeah, I'll let it stand as it is. I mean, at first the kill list themselves, right? Everybody's panicking post 9/11, pre 9/11, COINTELPRO stuff. The kill list themselves, or these observation surveillance lists, they're seen as a one and done thing, an emergency stopgap. But the mission creep always creeps, right? So it becomes a new normal. In the future age of war, we can leverage information to be more precise, to be more correct. And if we lose a little bit of accountability on the way, kudos to future historian grad students, because we just got them their master's or their PhD studying this.
Yeah. A shout out to the rabble rouser index that we discovered, I don't even know, years back now. Where we realized that there was a huge list that the FBI was keeping of people internally in the United States, not just like this, but people that they were watching, right? So you then watch, did that person take a trip to, I don't know, Egypt sometime recently? Uh-oh, now they get upgraded within that list.
Why does this guy keep going to Yemen? He doesn't have family there. Or does he?
Oh, wait a second. He has dual citizenship.
Oh, snap. Which is what they called it, the snap file. We're kidding, we hope. But maybe here we take a second to look at what the disposition matrix is, how it works.
Sounds good.
We're going to enter the matrix right after a quick word from our sponsor. So remember, we referred to this thing as being a database, but this isn't just like an elaborate Excel spreadsheet. It is so much more than a list alone. It compiles, as you said earlier, Matt, I believe, biographies of targets. It's a full dossier on their movements, their known associates, locations, group affiliations, and it goes even further than that with, recommended strategies for all of these various ways of handling or disposing of these individuals, including capturing, kidnapping, and even murdering them.
Yeah, like if this guy's this is a quote, if this guy is in Saudi Arabia, let's pull our Saudi connections, right? Or if they're on, public transit in the right place, let's follow them there. If they happen to be in North Africa, here's who we'll work with to find them. Per Greg Miller, we just can't say enough good stuff about your work there, Mr. Miller. Per him, the names of terrorism targets are also correlated toward resources that could be used to track them down. And then, in the defense of the matrix, or its architects at least, you will run into justification, right? Why is this a bad guy? Here is a sealed indictment, or here is some human we gathered on this person. We are, at least internally, we are rationalizing why this person should be kidnapped or murdered. At this point, they're already heavily surveilled.
Exactly. the wielders of the Matrix know that this person is directly associated with this known group that is considered a terrorist organization, right? And we know that this person has made moves X through Y, and we're worried about move Z. So we need to take this person out.
Yeah. We see this idea that the database maps. Here's why it's called disposition matrix. It maps the disposition of suspects, possibly beyond the reach of the American drone program, especially in the earlier days. If we go to The Atlantic, we'll see an excellent article by these journalists, Daniel Byman and Benjamin Wittes, Wittes, that gives you a flow chart. Now, the headline of this article might strike some people the wrong way. It might ruffle some feathers. The headline is How Obama Decides Your Fate If He Thinks You're a Terrorist. And if we scroll through, then we can see the flow chart of sort of the decision tree. And it starts with a target being identified, or you could even say pitched to the Matrix.
So first, a target is identified, and the criteria for identifying that target, kind of by design, is quite broad and pretty vague, and based on input, collaboration through multiple intelligence agencies who, are able to pull from telecommunications data, social media activity, all of the human intelligence kind of aspects that we've talked about on the show ad nauseum. So pretty much anything you could possibly get your hands on or your eyes on or your ears on, they are leveraging that stuff.
And so we've already violated a lot of what are called privacy protections in the first step. Now the data gets analyzed. Some coalition internally of different agencies and experts, they do that thing that people who like wine do. They sort of they smell the data, they
swish it around a little bit,
swish it around the glass. They get the bouquet, all right? The bouquet
the
ability
notes,
if something exists. And then they determine then in step 2, is this person, this individual, a threat to U.S. national security? And again, the definition of threat is super vague here. The definition of threat is kind of like the old meme of walking into a Target without a shopping list and just going off vibes. This is a vibe check. But they do, I don't want to dismiss it or diminish the level of work, because they're looking into associations deeply. So yeah, this person may not be identified as a terrorist. They may have never even had a late fee at the library, but what if they're in frequent contact with someone who knows someone who knows someone who is suspected of terrorist activity? What if they have any unexplained finances, however defined?
I mean, if they're even 7 degrees from Kevin Bacon, they're going to be of interest in this situation.
The travel is a tricky thing too.
Yes. Well, and remember all that hubbub about metadata, guys, back in the day?
This is why this leads to this. We don't know who they are, but we basically know who's talking to who, or that these nodes are communicating on a regular basis, more or less, right?
Yeah. All you really need for those leads are those tiny little dots of data. Then you can start correlating that with all this other stuff that's getting caught up.
And again, because the definitions, right, and the rubric is so broad here, it is possible. I'm not going to say plausible necessarily, but it is quite possible for someone to just have hit the wrong nodes of information, right? You're in the wrong Facebook group or something. You travel to, insert country here too often. And once all this goes through, that bouquet sniffing sommelier experience of surveillance, and once someone is considered viable, they enter the next phase, which has the most 1980s action movie blockbuster ridiculous name,
The Kill Chain. Yes. Oh, man, that's fun. Who would be in that? Maybe Jean-Claude Van Damme? Nah, it's not quite up his alley. It needs to be a little more of like a Jason Statham type figure, I think. The Kill Chain.
He was in Bloodsport. I'd watch Van Damme and Kill Chain.
Remember that one time we went to like an iHeart event and we got through the red carpet and Jean-Claude Van Damme was ahead of us in line? I'll never forget that as long as I live.
I bumped into him, and he turned around, and I thought, oh man, the guy from Time Cop is going to beat the snot out of me.
When you said he turned around, I'm picturing him doing a roundhouse kick right to your face.
He's he's ready.
Yeah,
he was ready.
He's
very kind guy,
and tight,
very kind,
small.
Guy.
He can get you. Yeah,
But
very nice guy. Yeah,
this kill chain is not automatically out. Instead, it is identification to determination of what happens next. Heavy surveillance, real Eye of Sauron stuff. If the person does appear to be a threat, you get the next part of the decision tree, a series of options for actions, drone strikes, for example, or this is less common now, but special operations for on-the-ground attacks. Think of Osama bin Laden, extraordinary rendition. The real name for that is kidnapping, and take him to a black site and figure out if he's actually a taxi driver.
Yep. Guys, I'm going to bring it up here. So we know this reporting comes out 2012, right? Then very soon after that, other countries around the world, after they get wind of it, thanks to Greg Miller, other journalists start looking into the same kind of stuff in their countries. And we learned from reporting by Ian Cobain in The Guardian in July of 2013 that it's not just the United States looking at targets. It's not just all of the mechanisms, and organizations within the U.S. It is MI5, MI6. It's folks in Australia and, again, mostly the Five Eyes countries. It's folks all over the planet looking at some of the same information, gathering up some of the same information through their telecoms, through all of their systems, and then making recommendations to the United States as kind of, I don't know, the weapon that gets aimed at people.
Yeah, it's real Avengers Assemble kind of thing. The Australian Secret Intelligence Service, or ASIS, is in there, as you mentioned. Mossad, obviously. And at first, at least on the U.S. side, there's a lot of interest in Pakistan, right? And Afghanistan, right? In the stands. And the first question for any enthusiast or fan of these things we call civil rights is, do they have any civil rights, the people being accused? The answer there is no. But the second question would be, is there any sort of at least internal check and balance, internal review? Is there, like the old philosophy of the 10th man? You guys know that one?
I know what the third man. What's the 10th man?
Yeah, we love numbering people, right? So the 10th man is this old idea that if there's a group of 10 people, decision makers, right, analysts, what have you, and 9 of them agree on a thing, then it is the job of the 10th person there to play devil's advocate, to say, what if, and you have to have something like that. So it may be at least a comfort, if a cold comfort, to realize that targets on the disposition matrix are, to our understanding, reviewed every 3 months. And so if you make it without blowing up that first 90 days, that's the closest you get to something like an appeal. But you are not part of it. You may never know you are on the list. Jeez Louise. We got to mention that when Greg Miller brought this to the public eye back in 2012, holy smokes, more than a decade ago now, the Matrix was already a global enterprise. It was facilitating operations on and off the books in the stands, in Somalia, Yemen, a couple of other countries. And the goal was to expand, to franchise out to operations across northern and eastern Africa, as well as in Iran. Okay, they were gonna touch Tehran as well, and with some friends in Mossad and our British friends, they were quite suited to do so.
Yep, I'm gonna the 10th man of that list. You notice that nothing was happening in Saudi Arabia, even though the intelligence was showing that the threats were coming directly from there and some of the funding.
Confirmed it. Also notice there's not a lot of coverage of Uncle Sam's so-called hegemonic backyard, right? The Caribbean, South and Central America. Mm-hmm.
Just interesting. Just
pointing that one out, you know.
Yep.
We're walking down the street of trade craft houses, and we're going, oh, that's weird. There's no one. Oh,
no windows on that one, eh?
Yeah.
All right.
So we could assume that this, with all the information we've heard so far, we could, like a lot of people back in 2012, assume that this was just an intelligence gathering op. You know what I mean? The stuff that all the countries and all the big private businesses do all the time. But it clearly, very quickly, like day 2, evolved past that into a covert assassination initiative. No trial, no jury, none of that other pesky stuff that America appears to hold so sacrosanct. You don't know if you're on the list, right? And if you are on the list, there's no realistic way for you to appeal being on a kill list. You can't go in and say, hey, actually, I am just, an Uber driver. You're looking, like I am just, I am just a grad student, right? You're looking for the other Ben Bolin. And yes, he's super down with, insert organization here, but that's not me. There's more than one person with this name.
Which can happen on like something much less severe, but like a no-fly list. But if I'm not mistaken, there is some recourse to finding out if you're on that kind of list and getting off of it, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Depending on your country. Yes.
Okay. I want to tell you something crazy here that deals exactly with this. And it comes from that Guardian article. And it's a father who lives in London with his sons. Okay. And 3 sons. Mm-hmm. And he is a dual citizen of both Britain, I guess, or the United Kingdom and Egypt. Mm-hmm. And one of his sons, they're all Muslim, right? They follow Islam. One of his sons becomes associated with one of these groups that's a quote known terrorist organization.
Sure.
And one of his sons is targeted, put into the disposition matrix via the United Kingdom and MI5, only to be killed. Okay. And then the father has no idea why or what's going on, why one of his sons has been killed. And in order to fix things, he and his whole family fly to Egypt, renounce their citizenship in Egypt, and then come back to the United Kingdom to say, hey, guys, we are not terrorists, basically. Because one of the things that the British government did around this time is they would, if somebody had dual citizenship and was spending a lot of time in Somalia, let's say, they would send a little message and a letter to the known address somewhere in the United Kingdom that says, hey, you're no longer a British citizen.
Ooh.
And since they did that, legally, they were getting around all these rules that they had of protecting their own citizens, right? So you don't have to do that anymore. Now, okay, they got the go-ahead to be a part of the kill chain.
Mm-hmm. And then also add to that, further distancing the direct hand, because, the same way Five Eyes handles loopholes about intelligence gathering. They would say, okay, now it's not us, the British, it's not our guys executing someone. We provided information to someone about someone who's no longer a citizen.
Well, and the argument could be made that this, again, like to the previous point we made about like the history of warfare and how things are seemingly comparatively less brutal and casualties are down. One could argue though that there's a kind of knock-on consequence of this kind of off the books kind of underhanded killing by the fact that it's creating maybe more enemies than it is killing them. Or more heavy-handed actions that then result in, legacy resentment that can then create additional conflicts, I guess,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, if anything, the disposition matrix is a highly organizational force. And we could argue, again, with validity, that because there are so many agencies and so many countries, all of which have their own panoply of agencies. Because of all these stakeholders participating, if they didn't have some kind of codex or single resource, their efforts could become chaotic. Multiple groups doing the same thing at once, working with different information, making mistakes. There's a lot of precedent for this, even just in the U.S. Agencies in the past have found themselves at odds. They're chasing the same proverbial rabbit and getting in each other's way. But again, the thing is, these aren't rabbits. These are people. Some of them may well be innocent. And the damning piece of this is we might never know, we being the public, when these mistakes get made. Like we know a few, we'll do a few examples here, but this I think speaks to the controversies that you're alluding to there, Noel. Civil rights groups definitely object to the Matrix, stem to stern. The ACLU has entered the chat, and in 2013, when all this was hitting, and other journalists, like you mentioned, Matt, were writing about this as well. The ACLU director of the time, Hina Shamsi, had a quote it's a bit long, so I suggest we round robin it, but I think this gives us a very good sense of where the criticism is coming from, at least.
Here's the quote. Anyone who thought U.S. targeted killing outside of armed conflict was a narrow, emergency-based exception to the requirement of due process before a death sentence is being proven conclusively wrong.
Oof. Yeah. Matt, you mind if I take the back out of this? I think it sort of hits on maybe what I was talking about to a degree. Mm-hmm. The danger of dispensing with due process is obvious because without it, we cannot be assured that the people in the government's death database truly present a concrete, imminent threat to the country. What we do know is that tragic mistakes have been made. Hundreds of civilian bystanders have died, and our government has even killed a 16-year-old U.S. citizen without acknowledging, let alone explaining his death.
A bureaucratized paramilitary killing program that targets people far from any battlefield is not just unlawful. It will create more enemies than it kills.
There you go.
This is a practical appeal, right? And this is one of the main bones I have to pick with this thing personally is the argument primarily is against a lack of accountability and transparency, but it's also a plea to consider these long tail consequences that you could create more terrorists, more extremists through these attacks. Exercise empathy, folks. Let's imagine you're a 5-year-old, right? You're a 6-year-old. Your parents were collateral damage, another damning euphemism. Your parents were collateral damage in a drone strike. And you grow up carrying that, right? Can you blame that person for seeing the United States as an enemy? It certainly functioned as one in your life.
I mean, it's the plot of every revenge film ever made, or at least many of them. Someone witnesses their parents being murdered, they grow up to become Batman. I mean, it's.
Or your brother, your sons. Remember that the father I mentioned earlier with the 3 sons, one of them got assassinated by the U.S. government. A quote from him in that Guardian article is, "It's madness. They're driving these boys to Afghanistan."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like our earlier episode on whether the FBI manufactures terrorists, is
precisely.
a similar aspect to it.
And it was a known thing. In Washington, at least in 2012, 2013, it was known that drone strikes were fueling more splinter groups and more individuals to join up with a group in their town.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because now you're looking for some kind of recompense, right? And if we look at specific examples, let's go to the one that the ACLU alludes to in their previous statement from 2013. In 2011, the Obama administration ordered a fatal drone strike on a suspected American Yemeni terrorist named Anwar al-Awlaki. This guy becomes the first U.S. citizen, and he was a U.S. citizen, to be targeted and killed by a drone strike from his own government. That occurred on September 30th of 2011. Just a few days later, it's October 14th. His son dies in a drone strike. His son is not a suspected terrorist. His son is not the official target of the strike. He is a 16-year-old boy. And the target is a guy named Ibrahim al-Bana. an Egyptian that was suspected of being a senior Al-Qaeda operative.
Yeah,
Jeez.
and the White House press secretary at the time had this to say about it. I would suggest that you should have a far more responsible father if they are truly concerned about the well-being of their children.
Whoa.
This is really tone deaf, awful.
It continues.
I don't think becoming an Al-Qaeda jihadist terrorist is the best way to go about doing your business. Says the guy who killed my father.
Yeah.
Gross.
It makes me think of the collateral murder video that WikiLeaks put out back in 2010 of, I think, a 2007 airstrike on people that ended up being journalists and a group of people that journalists were following and with. Yeah.
And then that's another example. Let's go to the example some of us may unfortunately remember, the drone strike on a wedding procession. On December 12th, 2013, a U.S. drone launched 4 Hellfire missiles on a convoy of 11 vehicles, cars and pickup trucks. This was during a counterterrorism op in Yemen, in like rural Yemen. The strike killed a dozen people. It wounded at least 15 others, and quite seriously. There's no two ways about it with this kind of stuff. Whatever the intentions may be, civilians are getting murdered in the process of hunting suspected terrorists. And again, suspected. So there are some internal documentation things, assets that are justifying these operations, but there's no day in court. There's no right to appeal. You might not know you're on the list until the explosion.
And we know this program it remains current, correct?
Correct.
Because It was my understanding that it came about under the Obama administration, and then it was continued by the Biden administration, but that wasn't necessarily like a done deal. Or I think maybe he even reinstated it. Like it did go away for a little while. It was my understanding. There's this article I found on foreverwars.com, Joe Biden's disposition matrix. And it just says that the Biden administration has reinstated a bureaucratic structure created under Barack Obama that wields the power of life and death.
And drone strikes continue under the current administration as well. The disposition matrix, or something like it, continues apace. Supporters will say, look, this is imperfect. Everybody admits that, but the program is still far more preferable to the tactics of the past. And I'm interested to hear you guys' thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, what are the other tactics? Sending operatives in the night, having a couple of well-placed CIA spies that take somebody out. But even then, you're still killing people that you suspect are a part of something. It reminds me of, I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty lately. It reminds me of all the storylines that they put in these video games, where they have all this intel on some bad guy, so they're going in, or they're sending in a drone strike just like this. And it's just, there's something about it. It's also secretive. It's also...
And weirdly corporate and cold. You know what I mean? I don't know. There's something...
The banality of
yeah.
evil.
But at the same time, there are human beings that are plotting terrible things.
Absolutely.
Right?
That is true.
So it's just, I get what we're saying when we're saying it's preferable, right?
And I guess we have to look at the math, though. And the math is murky, and it's hard to make out because we don't know those knock-on consequences. Like we can't always identify that in the data right away. That stuff that happens kind of behind the scenes and takes a lifetime of growing up with that resentment to lead down the path of making a choice to, continue on, perhaps become an even greater enemy, than the person that was killed in the first place.
Because in many instances, they're like 20-year-olds, right? Young 20-year-olds that are being targeted by this list.
Right. And this is something that I think we should all collectively grapple with together, because the idea that there is a less imperfect system inherently acknowledges that imperfections, dangerous ones, exist. And indeed, they may be endemic to the thing. They may be inextricable from the pursuit of the disposition matrix. So how much credence can we put in the idea that this will become better over time. The fewer mistakes will be made. We simply cannot, when there is no transparency outside of that 3-month review time window, there's not really anything. And outside of saying someone is suspected of terrorism, there's not hard proof. Now, we know a lot of supporters of this program will say, hey, logically, you're putting us in a very difficult position because we can't prove that we prevented another 9/11 because we killed someone before it happened, right? So we can't prove what would have happened in the future. Still, it's not going away. Drone strikes are the new normal. The disposition matrix, the weaponization of data, the weaponization of the Kevin Bacon game, it is not just going to continue, it is going to expand. And to the earlier question there, maybe one of the thresholds of efficacy or one of the milestones to consider, if we have the numbers, would be at what point does the number of civilians who die as a result of this, at what point does that exceed the number of civilians who died in 9/11, right? In actual terrorist attacks? And if so, how far can that discrepancy extend before someone says we need to reevaluate what's happening?
That's right. Because while maybe total casualties may be down, in modern warfare compared to the kinds of horrific trench warfare, tactics of the past and beyond, the collateral damage of people that were unrelated to the actual battle or to any allegiance to one side or the other, to me, that's almost like, it's hard to put a cost on any human life, but someone that's an active combatant losing their life, they kind of know what they're signing up for. I would maybe assign more of a value to someone who is completely unrelated to the cause and who just happens to be killed as a result of it. So, I don't know. It is kind of like a numbers game, but to me, I feel like even if fewer mass casualties are taking place in warfare, if more, innocent people are being killed, then that's worse than the past. I don't know.
Guys, we've framed this entire thing around the war on terror because that's really how this was fully weaponized and the evolution where it's at right now is based on continuing a war on terror, enemies of the United States and its allies. The thing that really scares me is thinking about this weapon and system being aimed at people that some new organization, some new regime, aimed at civilians and citizens of the United States that are seen as enemies of whatever the structure is that you are trying to build or protect. It feels like this. I don't know what to say other than it's a feeling. I can feel sometime in the future this being used against United States citizens.
Absolutely.
That's the huge concern right now on the horizon.
Well, it's certainly concerning me.
And not just U.S. citizens, but proponents will say, what about other countries that are participating in this, countries that are more tightly surveilled, like the UK? If there is not a clear rule of law, then it could become like a witch hunt. The person accused is exonerated after their death, which is very not great. This is a concern that I think is universal amid people who are, I wouldn't even call us critics, just people who are watching the trends, the patterns, the current evolution. And, a lot of our fellow conspiracy realists in the crowd tonight, you're veterans, you're actively serving in the armed forces or in the intelligence agencies in the US or abroad, which means that some of us have witnessed the effects of the disposition matrix firsthand. That's something where I want us to go to a primary source. We would love to hear from you. Is this a necessary evil? Is this what you would call coldly a net positive for the world? Does it address the dangers it aims to solve? Or have we instead, through desperation, with whatever noble intent, created something un-American, beyond the bounds of democracy, an unstoppable force that leads to more disaster in the future? These are good questions. Try not to put our thumb on the scale too hard there. but I think we raise valid concerns.
Yeah, well, just knowing that way before you ever get taken out, whoever you are, whoever we are, you would be on some list somewhere overlaid with all of your associates and locations and behaviors and likes and dislikes. And knowing that all of that information is already being scooped up on all of us. So it seems as though it probably already exists in one form or another.
Of course.
Where there's a probability that each of us would turn one way or another.
There's a non-zero likelihood.
Well, and y'all, just researching the stuff we do for the show and some of the travels that we do, throughout our lives and careers. I mean, I could see us having a perhaps low probability of creeping up onto a list of this type.
Or listening to this show.
Absolutely.
Is that part of your behavior?
Yeah.
Or even being pulled in the future expansions to help aid and abet some of the goals of the matrix, of the disposition matrix. Another thing, I didn't put it in the episode here, but another thing that naturally has to occur is, does the opposition have something like a matrix, whomever that opposition may be? And if so, what are they working toward? Anyway, this is the point of the show where we ask what you think and encourage you to enlarge your footprint with us. Participate in the list we're already on, probably multiple at this time. Tell us your thoughts, folks. Again, especially, not just to the veterans or the active members of armed forces and intelligence, but those who have witnessed the matrix effects firsthand. We really do want to hear from you, your opinion on necessary evil or a Leviathan that has grown beyond the bounds of democracy. So find us on a telephone, give us an email, or contact us online so you can add another data point to, your position on the list. Is there a leaderboard?
These are all good questions, Ben, and we'd like to hear from you. Reach out to us on your social media platforms of choice. We are Conspiracy Stuff Show on X, FKA Twitter, on YouTube, where we have video content galore for you to enjoy, and on Facebook, where we have our Facebook group, Here's Where It Gets Crazy. On Instagram and TikTok, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show.
We have a phone number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, you're going to have 3 minutes to leave a voicemail. Please give yourself a cool nickname and let us know within the message if we can use your name and message on the air. If you've got more to say that can fit in a 3-minute voicemail, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities that read every piece of correspondence we receive. And you don't have to wait until you feel like there's something longer than a voicemail. Whatever your chosen method of communication is the one we want to hear from you on. So be well aware, yet unafraid, sometimes the void writes or calls back. What are we talking about? There's one way to find out. Email us, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.